Over the last year, the car market has kind of been going through something. Toyota, Volkswagen, GM, Ford, Nissan, Volvo, and almost every other big-name car manufacturer has seen widespread disruptions alongside massive profit drops, and they were the lucky ones. Honda recently posted its first annual loss in just under 70 years of operations, and not to be outdone, Stellantis recorded the largest loss from an automaker outside of a major global recession. Embodying his company values, the Stellantis CEO broke down a turnaround plan that involved going all in on V8s, which was announced exactly 2 days before the start of the war in Iran. Now, I know you guys don't want to hear me say tariff disruption, consumer debt, and the K-shaped economy for another 15 minutes this week. And the, good news is that there is a little bit more going on here. Even at the top end of the market, Porsche saw its profits drop by 99%, encouraging them to sell off the ultra-premium Bugatti brand Land Rover, and the artist formerly known as Jaguar also saw profit fall by 99%, and even the king of the K, Ferrari themselves, have seen their shares decline by around 30% since the last time we covered the car market on this channel just 6 months ago. Of course, this stock trend was not helped by the Ferrari Magic Mouse, but that's actually worth addressing later on. For now, I know you might all be getting some schadenfreude seeing these companies start to struggle after taking advantage of accommodating economic conditions to screw consumers for the past 5 years. But like always, it's important to understand what is actually happening behind the scenes in these companies to see how it is going to impact you.
An auto company with facilities here in Indiana tonight is reporting losses of $2.7 billion.
Profits at German carmaker Porsche plunged by nearly 96% in the first 9 months of this year.
U.S. where auto giant Ford says it's taking a $19.5 billion write-down as it kills off several all-electric models.
BYD says it sold 2.3 million battery-powered cars globally in 2025.
Car payments are becoming harder to afford for many families as rising costs for essential items continue to strain household budgets.
There is a reason why I spend so much time on this channel talking about cars, despite personally driving a 15-year-old CR-V. And that's because for the past 100 years, the car market alongside the construction industry has been the canary in the coal mine for the wider economy. A healthy car market normally employs a lot of people in good-paying union jobs. It helps a country maintain its industrial base, and on the opposite side of the same coin, if people are buying lots of cars, it's a clear indication that they can, at the very least, qualify for a loan to make 7 years of irresponsible monthly repayments. Carmakers can help to both build a healthy economy and indicate its health at the same time. But they can also do the opposite. So to put everything into context, car sales in 2025 were actually at their highest level since the pandemic here in America. Worldwide, the number of new cars sold fully recovered, and actually exceeded pre-pandemic level sales, which should be cause for celebration, right? What's more is that because the average new car has become so much more expensive, even after adjusting for inflation, the amount of actual revenue car companies are making has never been higher, even though unit volumes are still down from their all-time peak. But then the question is, why are all of these companies doing so badly at the same time that the market itself is theoretically doing better than ever? Growing sales naturally shouldn't go hand in hand with collapsing profit, right? Or perhaps an even better question is, if this is what is happening to these companies during a good sales year, what's going to happen to them when sales actually slow down again, like what is kind of already happening right now? Well, there are really 4 big problems beyond the immediately obvious that are hurting car makers today. And the first is what I like to call the Great Flip-Flop, a name that I really hope catches on. If you go back through almost every one of those headlines talking about massive profit haircuts, you'll find the car makers themselves all citing the same thing: electric vehicles. Now, there are 2 very big reasons why they are trying so hard to point this out, and we will get to that soon. But beyond some accounting trickery, this is still an industry-wide problem. Honda's first loss since 1957 came with the company pointing straight at the billions it had poured into getting ready to build electric cars it now isn't going to sell. Stellantis turned a $5.5 billion profit into a $26 billion loss, and around $25 billion of that was write-downs as it quietly backed out of its EV plans. Ford booked nearly $20 billion in adjustments, and admitted its electric division alone lost almost $5 billion in a single year. Even the ones that stayed in the black still took a hit. GM turned a $2.7 billion profit for the year, but quietly scrapped its plans to go all-electric by 2035 and wrote down around $8.7 billion of EV investment. For the last decade, a lot of these major car manufacturers thought they were playing a game of catch-up to the EV leaders in the space, pushed by significant investor pressure from shareholders that wanted Tesla-level valuation. But a lot of them are now realizing that the demand they were all chasing is a lot softer than they were expecting. The early adopters that wanted an EV have already purchased one, and as the market is flooded with more options, it isn't necessarily driving people to make the switch. It's just dividing the original pool of customers between more brands. According to research from Cox Automotive, even existing EV owners are considering a switch back to internal combustion engine or hybrid vehicles. Across the entire industry, outside of the purely electric automakers, most companies have been quietly rolling back their bold projections that they would be a purely EV automaker within a decade. In America in particular, this has been accelerated by a cutdown in EV credits and, well, up until recently, some pretty cheap gas that made it a lot easier to keep the canyon narrow on the road. So the industry as a whole has seen where this is going, and they are all announcing major resets on their EV strategy. Now, to be completely fair and put this back into context, part of that rethinking process is rethinking all of the book value they assigned to the tooling and research that went into developing EV platforms and building the plants to produce them. A plant that was supposed to stamp out 1 million electric F-150s a year is just worth a lot more than one that is only producing 10,000 in reality. A lot of the companies that have announced those 99% profit drops are really just taking this year to readjust their balance sheet and record a loss, because they know everybody else in the industry is doing the same thing, so they won't look quite as bad. They are kind of like the zebra crossing the river. They know they need to do it, and they know there are angry shareholders in the water, but if they all do it at the same time, it's much less likely that they will be singled out. Now, on the other hand, I know this makes it all sound like nothing but an accounting illusion. But behind all of this, there is still a serious problem. These write-downs still represent real money that companies piled into a technology and capital infrastructure that they thought would be the future and generate them substantial returns, but turned out just to be underutilized and rapidly depreciating, which is probably an important lesson to keep in mind for no other reason in particular. Anyway, on top of this, the ongoing cost of running research, development, and production lines for both EVs and internal combustion engine vehicles is also not insignificant. Companies like to share parts and processes where they can, which is a lot more difficult when they have different models operating off an entirely separate drivetrain. Now, maybe this would all still be worth it if they were growing sales by catering to new markets, but this is also happening while unit sales are still below where they were before the pandemic. So even though they might be selling more expensive cars, they aren't exactly opening up new markets. It sounds bad, but so far this is only the flip. The flop is still playing out. In response to these market trends, some companies boldly and loudly pivoted back to expanding their portfolios of big gas-guzzling cars, just in time for gas prices to become a major pain point all over again. Now, you might logically think that anybody illogical enough to spend 6 figures on a new V8 Jeep Wagoneer wouldn't be the first to feel the pinch of gas prices. But well, I made a promise to keep irrational consumer behavior until the end of this video. For the car companies themselves, ongoing R&D is just part of being a car manufacturer. It is, by its nature, a highly capital-intensive business, and most manufacturers and their shareholders are prepared for this by itself, even if a lot of it has been wasted chasing market trends. But there are also other headwinds hitting them at the same time, making it a lot scarier to deploy this capital. So it's time to learn how money works to find out why the car market is eating itself, all during an otherwise good sales year. This video is sponsored by Monarch. Monarch is a private, ad-free personal finance platform that brings all your accounts into one clean dashboard. It automatically tracks your spending and net worth and helps you stay financially aligned without juggling spreadsheets. Instead of just showing where your money went, Monarch makes it easy to see the full financial picture, make smart adjustments, and make progress towards your goals with confidence. Plus, with bank-level encryption and read-only access, it is secure, and thousands of users have given it a 4.9-star rating. I started using Monarch for my monthly budget check-ins, and it has been a game-changer. All my accounts, cards, loans, and investments sync from over 13,000 institutions into one beautiful view on web or mobile, saving me time hopping between apps. I love the flexible budgeting that separates fixed and flexible spending with customizable rules and categories. And Monarch quietly comes through your numbers and surfaces patterns for you, things like spending changes or unusual transactions explained in plain English, so you always stay aware without constant alerts. There is also a built-in assistant you can ask anything about your finances, like how much you spent on travel last summer or whether you can afford a vacation without touching your savings. It answers from your actual data, not generic advice. Seeing my net worth trend and goal timelines for saving or paying down debt makes progress feel real and motivating, without the stress. Try Monarch yourself. Start your free trial, then scan the QR code on screen or use code HMW50 for 50% off your first year. So, the great flip-flop has left most major car manufacturers bleeding cash on a technology bet that hasn't paid off. At least, not yet. But the second big change is what is happening to badge engineering. One of the most underappreciated threats to these companies right now is the slow erosion of what has historically been their most valuable asset. High-end luxury cars, and especially performance cars, are more expensive to manufacture than regular mass-market cars, but not by as much as you might expect. So the significant markups they can charge come overwhelmingly from their badge and the brand value people give to it. The margins on cars from Porsche, Ferrari, JLR, and up until recently Tesla were huge. Porsche's operating margin was sitting around 19% in 2024. Ferrari has enjoyed unit margins of over 50% on most of their models, meaning that for every car they sell, they are making a unit profit of almost $250,000. Of course, a lot of this is used to fund their racing teams, their R&D, and their other branding. But even after that, they have run off a profit margin several times greater than most ordinary car makers. Now, more than almost any other product, people have historically been willing to spend money on cars as a status symbol even when the marginal utility was well into the territory of diminishing returns. But crucially, there was always still something there to justify it. A Porsche GT3 may be twice the price of a regular Porsche 911, which is twice the price of a BMW M3, which is twice the price of a BMW 320i. And for 99% of on-road driving, they are all going to get around just as quickly while also displaying some level of European luxury. But the top of the market is willing to pay 8 times as much, probably in addition to some significant dealer markups, because in theory, the GT3 has better performance capabilities than all of these other cars, so they could save 2 seconds a lap on the track days they will never go to. The same is true for people who wanted to be on the cutting edge of luxury or even new technologies. The problem is now, capabilities are getting democratized. Most modern cars are incredibly fast by historic standards, and performance EVs in particular all basically have the same spec sheet: 1,000 plus horsepower, 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, and a 100 kilowatt-hour battery, despite having huge price differences. The Ferrari Luce is kind of just a conveniently timed encapsulation of this. In the past, Ferrari clearly had a performance edge over most mass-market cars, but the Luce is by most metrics going to be slower than similar offerings from Porsche, Tesla, and even the phone maker Xiaomi. The Lucid Air Sapphire will beat the Luce on almost every metric that matters: more power, faster, longer range, for $391,000 less, and they are both equally likely to leave you locked out on the side of the road. Now, I know it's hard to reverse engineer irrational consumer behavior, and people don't buy cars off a spec sheet, especially in markets like high-end performance cars, which are clearly emotional, not rational purchases. But this still really matters because in the past, people could at least justify buying a very expensive performance car, because this was the only way to access those capabilities. This is just like someone buying a $5,000 handbag and talking about craftsmanship. It's clearly primarily motivated by the flex, but there is at least something there to justify it. The only other way people will be able to justify a Luce over a Model S Plaid is because they will like the badge, which still works, obviously, but it won't work forever, and eventually people will just be flexing how irrational they really are. Even outside of EVs, the democratization of performance is making it really hard for high-end manufacturers to sell their capabilities alone. Modern Corvettes are faster than almost any European supercar at a fraction of the price. A C8 ZR1X will beat a new Lamborghini by almost any performance metric for half the price, so the argument for spending significantly more is getting even harder to justify. Now, I know there are still a lot of rich people buying a lot of expensive cars, but in these markets, the simple idea that someone could pull up having paid half the price for a comparable car is a surefire way to deflate the egos these cars were there to support in the first place. Even in the more sensible segments of the market, the same kind of thing is happening all the way down to the base model of cars as well. For most people, their cars are basically just appliances that are getting harder to differentiate. Most manufacturers now have efficient engines, Apple CarPlay, and a decent safety rating with interiors that would be considered luxurious just 10 years ago. The channel Modern MBA did a great deep dive video on this corner of the market recently, and one of his big points is that even the biggest manufacturers are really just assembling third-party components from companies like Bosch, Harman, and Philips, meaning that it is becoming harder to differentiate between cars to people who treat the purchases like any other appliance. What has the best features for the given price and financing deal? Hot take alert, and feel free to come back to this video in 10 years' time to call me an idiot, but there really isn't anything stopping the car market from going the way of the computer market, where it becomes a lot harder to flex a particular brand when they are all using roughly the same components. Most people don't really care if you have an Acer or an HP laptop. They care about the specs and the components, and as cars become more appliance-like, there is really nothing separating them from the same fate, which leads us neatly onto the China problem. We briefly touched on it, but Chinese EVs and hybrids are here, and their cost-to-performance ratio is very hard to compete with. Now in America, this hasn't mattered yet, because trade barriers keep us isolated to the point that we really do live in our own little car bubble. A lot of the most popular cars in North America simply don't exist outside of North America. Seeing an F-150 in Europe, for example, is extremely rare. This is either because our cars are too large for roads in other major markets of Europe and Asia, too inefficient for local laws, or because there are just better, cheaper local alternatives. Now that's typically been fine, for us at least, because the USA is such a large market that even foreign automakers set up operations here to get inside the bubble. But there are a lot of manufacturers, particularly those from Europe and Japan, that depend far more heavily on exporting cars beyond their home country. And for a long time, the single largest and fastest growing market was China itself. European automakers in particular enjoyed several years of selling high-end cars to status-driven consumers in the rapidly developing Chinese economy. And for most of that time, they really didn't have any competition, because locally produced Chinese cars were almost embarrassingly cheap, poorly engineered, lacking in features, and most importantly, they couldn't compete with the status of the European luxury brands. But that has clearly changed. Even despite being largely protected from Chinese competition on their home turf, European automakers have run into a serious problem trying to sell their cars into China, because local alternatives are now far more competitive. Xiaomi, a company that didn't even have a car division 5 years ago, delivered over 400,000 vehicles in its first full year of making cars, and the base model outsold the Tesla Model 3 in China in 2025. And on the point of badge engineering again, a Porsche Taycan is still more of a status symbol than a Xiaomi SU7, despite looking almost identical. But in some cases, that's actually working against the European automakers. Just like Americans like to buy American cars, a level of nationalism is pushing some Chinese consumers to buy Chinese cars. Even before considering their exports, the rise of Chinese automakers have hurt the incumbent players that are losing one of their most valuable markets. But well, it would also be irresponsible not to include their exports, because they are coming. According to data from the Rodian Group, China exported over 1 million vehicles to the EU in 2025, accounting for around 6 to 7% of the market. And in early 2026, those exports accelerated by 62% year-on-year. BYD alone delivered 2.6 million vehicles last year, commanding roughly 20% of the global EV market. Australia is actually a really interesting case study here, because they are a nice little guinea pig for the larger American market given some important similarities. Big roads, consumers with strong purchasing power, and a surface-level cultural similarity to America. But because they no longer have a local car industry, Chinese manufacturers are treated the same as every other manufacturer, and they are dominating because of their cost competitiveness. Now, of course, there is the argument that China has subsidized these auto manufacturers to make them as competitive as they are today through co-investment and vertically integrated industrial planning. This is absolutely true, but it's also only fair to point out that American and European automakers are also the beneficiaries of generous government policy. And for what it's worth, China has also let a lot of their EV manufacturers fail. China has actually let more EV companies fail than America has had automakers in its entire history. We are now just seeing the ones that have actually survived. Now, all of these problems would be a serious threat to a healthy car market. But the fourth big problem is that over the next few years in particular, a wall of debt is likely to mean they are fighting for a smaller slice of a smaller pie. Now, we all know people are spending irresponsible money every month, so they can drive a car they can't reasonably afford. But there is one big piece of this that often gets ignored. We are about to hit peak refinance. The average transaction price for a new vehicle in America has gone from around $38,000 in 2019 to just under $49,000 today. And a lot of the car loans from the cheap money era are now expiring. Loans that were written when interest rates were near zero and monthly repayments were a lot more manageable. This means if people want to upgrade into a similar vehicle, they are going to be paying a higher interest rate on a higher base price, making deals significantly harder to do. According to data from LendingTree, the average monthly payment on a new vehicle hit $773 in the first quarter of 2026, and 1 in 5 buyers now commits to a payment of $1,000 or more each month. Of course, people will pay irresponsible amounts, but there are still fundamental limits to what loans can be given with any hope of repayment. Another underappreciated factor is that these financing realities are just making newer, more expensive vehicles harder to sell. Again, people will sign up for some pretty irresponsible lending if they see they are getting themselves into a better car. But as we saw earlier, car features that most people care about have pretty much plateaued while prices and interest rates have increased. Higher repayments for a downgrade, even if it is just the trim level, is a lot harder to get people excited about at a dealership negotiating table. The industry's, solution to this has basically been to just make the loans longer. Effective loan terms after refinancing now average over 90 months, or 7.5 years of repayment on a depreciating asset. In January 2026, the 60-day delinquency rate on subprime auto loans hit 6.9%, the highest level recorded in more than 3 decades of tracking. And roughly 31% of trade-ins towards new vehicles now carry negative equity, with the average underwater amount sitting at around $7,200. EVs in particular are now depreciating faster than their internal combustion engine equivalents, averaging around 58 to 59% depreciation over 5 years compared to roughly 45 to 46% for ICE. And beyond that, cars are statistically lasting longer too. So it's harder to make a new deal happen, while also easier to just keep driving the same vehicle for longer, which for what it's worth is exactly what people should be doing as long as it's still safe. People can't afford to trade up, and the cars they're sitting in are in many cases just as well equipped as anything they would be able to trade into with the same repayment. The final thing is that higher interest rates are also hurting manufacturers themselves, just as much as their customers. Most large auto manufacturers carry a lot of debt to finance their financing divisions, but also to fund their ongoing highly capital-intensive operation. Ford, for example, has closed $163 billion worth of debt on their books, with $22 billion of that being for their core business functions. Just the interest on that debt now accounts for as much as half of their free cash flow. Now, individually, these are all problems that car manufacturers are worried about, but together it is a bit of a perfect storm. Companies are burning capital they are running out of for products their customers are struggling to afford in a market that is getting more competitive and harder to stand out in. It sounds bad, but it gets worse. This is just what has been happening recently. So if you want the full breakdown, go and watch this video next. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.